The words, "You're not real family," echoed through my kitchen like a slap across the face. My 26-year-old daughter Claire stood there, her finger pointed at me with pure contempt, her eyes filled with a rage I had never seen before. At that moment, standing in the house I had worked 30 years to pay off, watching my only child treat me like a stranger who had wronged her, something inside me finally broke. But this time, it didn't break into despair. It hardened into steel resolve. I pulled out my phone right there in front of her, opened my banking app, and blocked every single credit card she had access to. By the end of that week, I would take my house back. My name is Margaret, I'm 58 years old, and this is the story of how unconditional love became unconditional boundaries. Where are you watching this from? Drop your location in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because what happened next shocked everyone, including me. If you've ever felt taken for granted by your own children, if you've ever sacrificed everything only to be treated like you're the problem, stay with me. This story gets darker before it gets better, but I promise you, there's light at the end. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when things were simple and beautiful. I became a single mother when Claire was just 6 years old. My ex-husband decided that fatherhood wasn't for him and disappeared from our lives with barely a goodbye. The child support checks came sporadically at first, then stopped altogether. I remember the exact moment I realized I was truly on my own. Claire had asked me when Daddy was coming to her school play, and I had to tell her he wasn't coming. The look in her eyes that day made me promise myself that I would be enough for her. I would be both mother and father. I would make sure she never felt that absence again. I worked as a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, and I picked up every extra shift I could get. Double shifts became my normal. There were months when I worked 20 days straight without a single day off. My feet ached constantly. I lived on coffee and determination. But every paycheck brought me closer to my goal. I wanted to give Claire stability, a home she could count on, a foundation she would never have to worry about. When I finally saved enough for a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, I cried for an hour in the empty living room. This was ours. This was security. This was everything I had worked for. Claire was my whole world during those years. I attended every single school event, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, even when my shift ended just an hour before and I had to race across town still wearing my scrubs. I made her lunch every morning with little notes tucked inside. I helped with homework at the kitchen table late into the night. When other mothers talked about date nights and girls' trips, I smiled and nodded, but my social life was non-existent. Claire was my companion, my best friend, my purpose. Looking back now, I can see that maybe I made her too much of my world. Maybe I should have maintained more of my own identity. But hindsight is perfect, and at the time, I was just a mother doing everything she could to make up for a father's absence. The elementary school years were golden. Claire was sweet, thoughtful, always ready with a hug when I came home exhausted. She would make me cards that said, "Best mom ever," and leave them on my pillow. She would tell her friends proudly that her mom was a nurse who saved lives. We had traditions, just the two of us. Friday night movie nights with popcorn. Saturday morning pancakes where she got to crack the eggs. Sunday afternoon walks in the park where we would feed the ducks and talk about everything and nothing. Those memories are still precious to me, untainted by what came later. They remind me that I wasn't imagining the love we shared. It was real once. Middle school brought some typical teenage attitude, but nothing alarming. Claire rolled her eyes when I asked about homework. She wanted more privacy, more independence. This seemed normal, healthy even. I tried to give her space while still being present. We still had our movie nights, though now she picked films I didn't always understand. We still talked, though the conversations became shorter, more surface level. I told myself this was just growing up, just the natural progression of a child becoming her own person. I wish I had paid more attention to the smaller signs that something was shifting in how she viewed me, in how she viewed the world. High school is when everything started to change, though I didn't recognize it as the beginning of the end at the time. Claire discovered social media, and with it came a whole new world of comparison and materialism that I wasn't prepared to navigate. Suddenly, our modest three-bedroom house wasn't good enough anymore. My 10-year-old Honda Civic was an embarrassment. The clothes I bought her from Target were cheap compared to what her friends wore. I would come home from 12-hour shifts to find her scrolling through Instagram, looking at influencers living lives of luxury, and I could see the discontent growing in her eyes. The complaints started subtly at first. "Mom, why can't we go on vacations like Emma's family?" she would ask, showing me pictures of her friend at some beach resort. I would patiently explain our financial situation, how I was still paying off the house, how college was coming and we needed to save. She would nod, but I could see she wasn't really listening. She wasn't interested in explanations about mortgages and savings accounts. She only saw what she didn't have compared to others. When her 16th birthday approached, she asked for a big party at a rented venue. I suggested we have a nice celebration at home with her close friends. The tantrum that followed was unlike anything I had experienced with her before. She screamed that I was ruining her life, that all her friends would think she was poor, that I clearly didn't love her if I couldn't do this one thing for her. I caved. I always caved. I picked up extra shifts for 2 months straight, barely sleeping, running on fumes and guilt. I rented the venue she wanted, hired a DJ, bought decorations that matched her Pinterest board exactly. The party cost me almost $3,000 that I didn't have. I put it on a credit card, telling myself it was worth it to see her happy. On the night of the party, Claire barely acknowledged me. I had volunteered to help serve food, but she told me to stay in the background because having her mom hovering was embarrassing. I watched from the corner as she took selfies with her friends, posted them online with captions about having the best birthday ever, and not once did she thank me. Not once did she introduce me to her friends as the person who made it all possible. I drove home that night with a knot in my stomach, a feeling that I had just established a very dangerous pattern. I was right, but I wouldn't understand just how dangerous for several more years. College decision time brought our differences into sharp focus. Claire's grades were decent, B's mostly, with a few A's in subjects she enjoyed. She could have gone to the state university with in-state tuition and been perfectly fine. But Claire had other ideas. She wanted to attend Westmont College, a private liberal arts school 3 states away that cost nearly $60,000 a year. When she showed me the brochure, my heart sank. I sat her down and went through our finances carefully. I showed her the numbers, explained that I simply couldn't afford it without taking out massive loans. I suggested the state school, which had an excellent communications program and would leave her debt-free. The conversation ended with her in tears, accusing me of crushing her dreams, of not believing in her, of caring more about money than her future. I couldn't bear to see her that devastated. I told myself that education was the one thing worth going into debt for, that this was an investment in her future, that somehow we would make it work. I took out $60,000 in Parent Plus loans, signed my name on papers that made my hand shake, and watched my financial security evaporate. Claire was ecstatic. She promised she would get scholarships, that she would work part-time, that after graduation she would help me pay back the loans. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. When I dropped her off at Westmont that fall, watching her wave goodbye from the steps of her dorm, I felt pride mixed with terror. I had given her the opportunity one never had, but at what cost? The next 4 years were a blur of work and worry. I picked up more shifts, worked holidays, skipped meals to save money. Claire's phone calls home became less frequent and usually started with a "Mom, I need." She needed money for textbooks, for sorority dues, for spring break trips that were networking opportunities. I sent what I could, often putting my own bills on credit cards to make sure she had what she needed. Her visits home during breaks were brief and filled with her scrolling through her phone, meeting up with high school friends, treating our house like a hotel. When I asked about her classes or her plans after graduation, she gave vague answers about figuring it out and exploring options. The promises about scholarships and part-time work never materialized. The promise about helping with loans was never mentioned again. Claire graduated with a degree in communications and no clear career path. Within a week of graduation, she called me. "Mom, I'm coming home. Just for a few months while I look for the right job." My heart sank, but what could I say? She was my daughter. She needed help. Of course she could come home. When she arrived with her car packed full of belongings, she immediately claimed the master bedroom. I need the bigger space, Mom. I'm going to be doing job applications and I need room to spread out. I moved into the smaller guest bedroom, telling myself it was temporary, that it was just for a few months. I didn't realize that a few months would stretch into a year, then longer, and that the daughter who moved home would not be looking for independence but rather settling into a life of permanent dependence. The job search was half-hearted at best. Claire would sleep until noon, then spend the afternoon on her laptop, which she claimed was networking, but looked more like scrolling through social media. She had interviews occasionally but always found reasons why each job wasn't right. The pay was too low. The commute was too far. The work wasn't aligned with her personal brand. She started an Instagram account where she posted about lifestyle and wellness, calling herself an influencer, though her follower count remained in the low hundreds. When I gently suggested she might need to take any job to start building experience, she accused me of not supporting her dreams, of being like everyone else who didn't understand the influencer economy, of being too old to get how the modern world worked. Then Brandon entered our lives, and everything got exponentially worse. Claire met him at a coffee shop where she spent her afternoons working on her brand. Brandon was 29, tall, conventionally attractive, and what he called an entrepreneur. When Claire brought him home for dinner that first time, I tried to be welcoming. I asked him about his work. He gave vague answers about cryptocurrency investments and a consulting. He wore expensive sneakers and a designer watch but seemed to have no regular employment. My nursing experience had made me good at reading people, and every instinct I had screamed that something was off about this man. But Claire was glowing in a way I hadn't seen in years, and I wanted her to be happy. I swallowed my concerns and smiled through dinner. Brandon started staying over on weekends, then weeknights, then essentially every night. He never asked permission. He just gradually moved in, bringing his gaming console, his clothes, his presents into every corner of my house. Claire stopped even pretending to look for work. The two of them would stay up until 3 in the morning playing video games or watching movies, then sleep until afternoon. I would leave for my 6 a.m. shift at the hospital and return at 7 p.m. to find them just waking up, the kitchen a disaster of dirty dishes and empty takeout containers. When I asked if they could please clean up after themselves, Brandon would smirk and say something like "Sure thing, Mom," in a tone that made it clear he had no intention of doing anything. Claire would jump to his defense. "God, Mom, we were going to clean it up. You're always so critical." The financial exploitation began so gradually that I almost didn't notice it at first. Claire came to me one evening about 3 months after Brandon had essentially moved in, her expression vulnerable in a way that reminded me of when she was a little girl asking for help with homework. "Mom, can I talk to you about something?" she asked, sitting down next to me on the couch. I muted the television, immediately attentive. "Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong?" She twisted her hands in her lap, a gesture I recognized as nervousness. "I'm really trying to get my influencer career off the ground, but sometimes I need to make purchases for content, you know? Clothes for photos, props, things like that. But my credit isn't great because I don't have a credit history. Would you consider adding me as an authorized user on one of your credit cards? Just for emergencies and business expenses. I promise I'll be responsible." Every alarm bell in my head went off, but they were immediately drowned out by guilt and love. This was my daughter asking for help to build her career. Wasn't this what parents did? Support their children's dreams? I thought about all the times I had said I believed in her, encouraged her to follow her passion. How could I say no now when she was finally taking initiative? "Okay," I heard myself say. "But Claire, this is serious. Credit card debt can spiral quickly. You need to run any purchases by me first, and we should set a monthly limit." She threw her arms around me, squeezing tight. "Thank you, Mom. You're the best. I promise I'll be so careful. This is going to change everything for me." The first month, the charges were reasonable. A new outfit for $60. Some photography equipment for $150. Some home decor items she said were for aesthetic content. The bill was $300, manageable, and she showed me the Instagram posts she had created with those purchases. They looked professional, and I felt a surge of pride. Maybe this would work out. Maybe I was helping her launch a real career. The second month, the charges doubled. Designer handbag, $800. Mom, luxury items get more engagement, she explained when I questioned it. This is an investment. Brands want to work with influencers who project success. I wanted to believe her. I paid the bill. By the fourth month, I was getting statements for $3,000 to $4,000. Expensive dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford to eat at myself. Electronics. More clothes, more handbags, more shoes. When I sat Claire down to discuss it, Brandon was suddenly there beside her, his arm draped protectively over her shoulders. Mrs. Margaret, he said with that smile that never reached his eyes, you have to understand that building a brand requires capital investment. Claire is on the verge of breaking through. These purchases are strategic. Once she hits 10,000 followers, the sponsorship money will start rolling in and she can pay you back double. Claire nodded eagerly. He's right, Mom. Brandon has been helping me understand the business side. This is how it works. You have to spend money to make money. I wanted to argue, to point out that her follower count had barely increased despite all this spending, that none of this seemed to be generating any income whatsoever. But the way they sat there, united against me, made me feel like I was the one who didn't understand, like I was just an out-of-touch older woman who couldn't grasp modern business. I paid the bills. I picked up extra shifts. I stopped buying new clothes for myself. I ate rice and beans for dinner while they ordered Thai food and sushi. My credit card debt climbed to $20,000, then $30,000, then more. I stopped opening the statements because seeing the numbers made me physically ill. The breaking point began with an accident, or what seemed like an accident at the time. I had been scheduled for a 12-hour shift at the hospital, but there was a staffing issue and they sent me home after only 4 hours. I was actually relieved because I was exhausted, running on maybe 4 hours of sleep, my feet aching, my back screaming. I drove home looking forward to maybe taking a hot bath and getting a nap before my next shift tomorrow. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Brandon's car was there, which wasn't unusual, but there was also an unfamiliar sedan parked on the street. I let myself in quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone if Claire was filming content. That's when I heard their voices coming from the kitchen. Claire and Brandon, talking in low tones but with an intensity that made me freeze in the hallway. When is this house going to actually be ours? Brandon's voice was sharp, frustrated. I'm tired of tiptoeing around your mom like we're guests. This is ridiculous. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding, telling myself I should announce my presence, but my feet wouldn't move. Claire's response made my blood run cold. She'll leave it to me in her will eventually. We just need to be patient. She's not going anywhere anytime soon, unfortunately. The casual cruelty of that word, unfortunately, hit me like a physical blow. Brandon laughed, but it wasn't a warm sound. Patient? Babe, I've been patient for almost 2 years now. Can't we speed this process up? Get her to sign the house over now, for estate planning or whatever. My buddy Jason's girlfriend did that with her mom. Saved on taxes or something. There was a pause, and I could hear the sound of the refrigerator opening, the clink of bottles. I've been working on it, Claire said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. She feels so guilty about everything, about my childhood, about Dad leaving. I just need to play that angle more. Make her feel like signing over the house is the right thing to do, like it's what good mothers do for their daughters. I stood in that hallway, my hand pressed against my mouth to keep from making a sound, tears streaming down my face, and felt my entire reality crumbling. This was my daughter, the baby I had held in my arms, the child I had sacrificed everything for, casually discussing manipulating me out of the only asset I had, the home I had worked 30 years to pay for. And she was doing it with her boyfriend, a man who was clearly using her, who clearly saw both of us as nothing more than a meal ticket. The conversation continued, but I couldn't hear it over the roaring in my ears. I backed slowly toward the door, let myself out as quietly as I had entered, and sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to process the magnitude of what I had just learned. When I finally composed myself enough to go back inside, I walked in normally, letting the door close loudly behind me. "I'm home early." I called out, my voice somehow steady. Claire and Brandon appeared from the kitchen, their faces pleasant masks of welcome. "Oh hey, Mom," Claire said brightly. "Everything okay?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. "Just got sent home early." "Slow day." Brandon smiled that empty smile. "Cool. Hey, we were just talking about you, actually. We had an idea we wanted to run by you." My stomach clenched, but I kept my expression neutral. "Oh? What's that?" Claire came over and linked her arm through mine in a gesture that would have melted me yesterday but now felt like manipulation. "We were thinking it might be smart to add my name to the house deed. You know, for estate planning purposes. That way, if anything ever happened to you, God forbid, there wouldn't be any complications." Brandon's friend is a lawyer and said he could draw up the paperwork for free. There it was, exactly what I had heard them plotting moments before, being presented to me as if it were a thoughtful suggestion, as if they had my best interests at heart. I looked from Claire to Brandon, both of them watching me with expectant expressions, and felt something inside me that had been bending for 26 years finally snap. "I need to think about that," I said carefully, extracting my arm from Claire's grasp. "That's a big decision." Brandon's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sure, but I mean, it's just paperwork, right? Just makes things cleaner legally. Doesn't really change anything." "If it doesn't change anything, then there's no rush," I replied, heading toward what used to be my bedroom. "I'm going to rest before my next shift." I closed the door behind me, leaned against it, and made a decision. I was done being manipulated. I was done being used. I was done sacrificing myself for people who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. That night, after they had gone to sleep, I pulled out my credit card statements and really looked at them for the first time in months. $47,000 in debt, not including the $60,000 in student loans I was still paying off for Claire's education. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the small guest bedroom that used to be my craft room, the room I had been pushed into in my own house, and I did something I should have done months ago. I looked at everything with clear eyes. I pulled up my bank statements on my laptop, my credit card accounts, my retirement savings, and I documented every single thing. The picture that emerged was devastating. $47,000 in credit card debt from charges I hadn't made. $60,000 in student loans I was paying off alone despite Claire's promises to help. My retirement account that should have had over $100,000 now sat at $12,000 because I had been making hardship withdrawals to cover bills. My savings account was completely empty. I was 58 years old, working myself into the ground, and I had nothing to show for it except debt and exhaustion. But it was what I found next that truly changed everything. I decided to check my credit report, something I hadn't done in over a year. As the report loaded, I felt my hands begin to shake. There were accounts I didn't recognize. Store credit cards from high-end retailers that I had never opened. A personal loan for $15,000 that I had never applied for. My credit score had dropped from the low 700s to the mid 500s. Someone had been opening accounts in my name, and I didn't need to be a detective to figure out who. I took screenshots of everything, my nursing training kicking in with its emphasis on documentation and evidence. If this was going to be a battle, I would need ammunition. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My supervisor was so surprised she asked if I needed to go to the emergency room. I assured her I just needed a day to handle some personal matters. After Claire and Brandon finally rolled out of bed around noon and left the house, supposedly to meet with a potential sponsor, I went into Claire's room. I felt like a criminal, an invader, but this was my house and I needed to know the truth. In her desk drawer, underneath some magazines and old mail, I found a folder. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. There were partially filled out deed transfer forms with my forged signature practiced in the margins. There were printouts about my house's value, estimates from real estate websites. There were text message screenshots between Claire and Brandon discussing their timeline for getting me to sign over the property, discussing what renovations they would make before selling it, discussing how much money they expected to pocket. One text exchange stopped me cold. Brandon had written, "Your mom is so gullible. This is almost too easy." Claire's response, "I know, right? She'll do anything if she thinks it makes her a good mom. The guilt over my childhood is the gift that keeps on giving." I photographed everything with my phone, my hands steady now, fueled by a cold anger I had never felt before. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a temporary lapse in judgment. This was calculated, premeditated exploitation. This was my daughter and her boyfriend systematically destroying my financial life while mocking me behind my back. I left the house and drove to a coffee shop across town where I knew I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. I sat in a corner booth and started making calls. The first was to Rita, my neighbor who had lived next door for 15 years. Rita was a retired attorney who had handled real estate law for 30 years before retiring. "Rita, I need help," I said when she answered, and my voice cracked on the last word. "Can I come over?" Within an hour, I was sitting in Rita's immaculate living room, laying out everything, showing her the documents, the credit reports, the text messages. Rita's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. "Margaret, this is financial elder abuse," she said finally, her legal mind cutting through to the core. "What Claire and Brandon are doing is not just morally wrong, it's illegal. You have grounds for criminal charges." The words, elder abuse, hit me hard. I didn't think of myself as elderly, as vulnerable, as someone who could be abused. I was a nurse, a professional, a strong woman who had raised a child alone and bought a house through sheer determination. But the evidence was right there in front of me. I had been victimized by my own daughter. Rita made some calls, and by 5 o'clock that evening, I had appointments lined up. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., consultation with a criminal attorney. Tomorrow afternoon, 2 p.m., meeting with a financial advisor who specialized in debt recovery. Wednesday morning, appointment with a family therapist who dealt with adult-child estrangement. Rita also gave me the name of a locksmith who could come on short notice and a document specialist who could help me secure all my important papers. That night, I went home and acted as normal as possible. Claire and Brandon were on the couch, Brandon playing video games while Claire scrolled through her phone. "Hey, Mom," Claire said absently, not looking up. "Can you order pizza? We're kind of hungry." Before, I would have done it without question, adding another $30 to my credit card debt. Tonight, I looked at them both and said, "Order it yourself. I'm going to bed early." Claire's head snapped up, surprised by the refusal. "Seriously? You can't just order a pizza?" I kept my voice even. "I'm tired, Claire. Use your own money." I walked into my room and closed the door on her shocked expression, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. The next morning, my meeting with the criminal attorney, James Morrison, was illuminating and terrifying in equal measure. I laid out everything I had discovered. He reviewed the documents with the practiced eye of someone who had seen this pattern before. "Mrs. Margaret, you have an extremely strong case," he said, looking at me over his reading glasses. "Identity theft, fraud, forgery, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The text messages alone show intent and premeditation. The question is, how far do you want to take this?" I hadn't expected that question. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair. "You could press criminal charges. Claire could face jail time, possibly Brandon too. Or you could handle this civilly, recover what you can through lawsuits and settlements, focus on protecting yourself going forward rather than punishment. There's also a middle path where you use the threat of criminal charges as leverage to negotiate a settlement." The thought of my daughter in jail made me physically ill, but the thought of her continuing to victimize me made me furious. "I need time to think about that part," I said finally. "But I need to protect myself immediately. What should I do first?" James outlined a plan with military precision. First, freeze all credit cards Claire had access to today, immediately. Second, file a police report for identity theft regarding the cards opened in my name. Third, change all locks on my house. Fourth, serve Claire and Brandon with a formal eviction notice, 30 days as required by law. Fifth, remove Claire as beneficiary on all accounts and my will. Sixth, file for a restraining order if they became threatening. The plan was comprehensive and brutal, and it felt like both the right thing and the most painful thing I had ever done. I left James's office with a stack of paperwork and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. My next stop was the bank. I sat down with a manager I had known for a decade and explained the situation. She was sympathetic but professional. Together, we closed the credit cards Claire had access to and opened new accounts at a different bank entirely, accounts Claire would have no way of knowing about. We set up fraud alerts on everything. We changed all my passwords and security questions. The manager also helped me file disputes on the fraudulent accounts that had been opened in my name. This is going to take time to resolve, she warned me. But you're doing the right thing. Better late than never. By the time I left the bank, it was afternoon. I had one more crucial stop. The hardware store where I purchased 3 new deadbolt locks, the kind that required keys from both inside and outside. Then I stopped at an electronics store and bought a complete home security camera system, the kind that recorded to the cloud and could be accessed from my phone. I was building a fortress, and the walls were going up fast. I called the locksmith Rita had recommended, and he agreed to come to my house at 8 a.m. the next morning, a time when Claire and Brandon would definitely still be asleep. That evening, I came home to find them both on the couch as usual. "Hey, Mom," Claire said with that same casual entitlement I had once mistaken for comfort. "Brandon and I were thinking about taking a trip to Miami next month. There's an influencer conference there that would be amazing for networking. It's only like $2,000 for both of us including the hotel. Can we use your card?" This would have been the moment I usually said yes, absorbing the cost, making it work somehow. Instead, I looked at her calmly and said, "No, Claire. I can't afford that." The shock on her face would have been comical if the situation weren't so tragic. "What do you mean you can't afford it? You always say yes." "I'm saying no this time. If you want to go to Miami, you'll need to pay for it yourself." Brandon sat up, his casual demeanor sharpening into something harder. "That's pretty selfish, don't you think? Claire's been working really hard on building her career. This could be her big break." I looked at him directly for the first time in months. "Brandon, I don't recall asking for your opinion on how I spend my money." His eyes narrowed, and I saw a flash of the person he really was underneath the charming facade. "Your money? You mean the house that should be in Claire's name? The credit cards she's been using to invest in her future? Seems like we're all pretty intertwined financially here." The threat was barely veiled. I smiled, a cold smile that felt foreign on my face but somehow right. "That's an interesting perspective. We should definitely have a longer conversation about finances soon. But not tonight. I have an early morning tomorrow." I went to my room and locked the door, something I had started doing. I could hear them talking in hushed, angry voices in the living room, but I didn't care. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app one final time. Taking a deep breath, I systematically went through every credit card, every account Claire had access to, and I've blocked them all. Each click felt like cutting a cord, severing a connection that had become toxic. My phone was in my hand, the screen glowing with the final confirmation. All cards blocked. All access removed. It was done. The next morning would bring the locksmith, the cameras, and the eviction notice I had already prepared. But tonight, this moment, was when I truly took my life back. I thought about the little girl who used to make me cards that said, "Best mom ever." I thought about the teenager who rolled her eyes but still hugged me goodnight. I thought about the young woman who had promised to help me with college loans. And I grieved for all of them, because that Claire was gone, if she had ever really existed at all. The person living in my house now was a stranger who saw me as a resource to be exploited, an obstacle to be removed, a means to an end. And I was done being any of those things. Tomorrow, Claire and Brandon would wake up to a new reality. Tomorrow, they would discover that the woman they thought they had broken had instead become someone they never anticipated. Tomorrow, the consequences would begin. But tonight, for the first time in years, I slept deeply, dreamlessly, and without guilt. The locksmith arrived at exactly 8 a.m. as promised. I had been awake since 5, dressed and ready, my stomach churning with anticipation and dread. Through the security camera I had installed myself the night before, positioned discreetly in the living room, I could see Claire and Brandon still asleep in what used to be my bedroom. The locksmith was a quiet, efficient man in his 60s who asked no questions as I explained I needed all 3 exterior doors rekeyed immediately. Within 90 minutes, my house had new locks, and I held the only set of keys. I paid him in cash and thanked him profusely. He paused at the door, seeming to sense the gravity of what was happening. "Ma'am, I've been doing this for 40 years. I've changed a lot of locks for a lot of reasons. You're doing the right thing. Whatever's happening here, you're doing the right thing." His words stayed with me as I prepared for what came next. I left the house before Claire and Brandon woke up, checking my phone constantly to watch the camera feed. At 10:30, I saw movement. Brandon emerged first, shuffling toward the kitchen in his boxers and a t-shirt, completely at home in my space. Claire followed 20 minutes later, her hair messy, wearing one of my robes that she had claimed as her own months ago. I watched them move through their morning routine, oblivious to the fact that their world was about to implode. Around 11, Claire's phone must have notified her of a declined transaction because I saw her pick it up, frown at the screen, and try again. Then again. Then she was calling someone, probably her bank, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm. I was sitting in a Starbucks 3 miles away, my own phone in my hand, watching this unfold in real time. Brandon came into frame, and I could see Claire showing him her phone, both of them growing more agitated. Then Brandon pulled out his wallet and tried what I assumed was his own card, which also must have been declined because his face flushed red with anger. They were trying to buy something, probably their usual late breakfast from some expensive delivery service, and discovering that the money train had suddenly stopped. Claire tried calling me. I let it go to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. A text appeared on my phone, "Mom, what's going on? Your cards aren't working." I didn't respond. Another text, "Mom, seriously, this isn't funny, we need to get food." Still nothing from me. By noon, my phone was exploding with messages. "Answer your phone, why are you doing this? Mom, please, we need to talk about this." I silenced the notifications and ordered another coffee, waiting. My attorney James had advised me that the element of surprise was crucial. Let them panic, let them scramble, let them show their true colors before they had time to construct a narrative or a defense. At 1 p.m., I watched through the camera as they grabbed their keys and headed for the door, presumably to come find me or to go try to fix whatever financial problem they thought had occurred. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I drove home, timing it so I would arrive just minutes after they left. I parked in the driveway and quickly went to work. I had prepared everything the night before. The eviction notice, properly formatted and legally sound, went on the front door in a clear plastic sleeve. 30 days to vacate the premises, signed and dated, with my attorney's information at the bottom. Inside, I had already boxed up their most essential belongings the night before while they slept, their clothes, toiletries, important documents I had found in their room. These boxes now sat in the garage with a note, "Your belongings. You have 30 days to arrange pickup of remaining items." Then I systematically went through the house, removing anything that was clearly theirs. Brandon's gaming console, unplugged and boxed. Claire's ring light and camera equipment, packed away. Her makeup and beauty products from the bathroom, in a box. Every trace of their occupation of my space, prepared for removal. The final touch was the most satisfying. I printed out several of the text messages I had found, the ones where they mocked me and planned their manipulation. I placed these in clear sleeves and left them on the kitchen counter where they couldn't be missed, with a simple note, "I know everything. The lies, the fraud, the forged documents. My attorney has copies of all evidence. Do not contact me except through legal counsel. You are no longer welcome in this house." My hands were shaking as I placed the note, but it was adrenaline now, not fear. I was taking my life back, and it felt powerful and terrifying and absolutely necessary. I left the house and drove to Rita's, where I had arranged to stay for the next few days. Rita had insisted, worried about confrontation, and I had agreed it was the smart move. From her guest room, I watched my security cameras obsessively. At 3 p.m., Claire and Brandon's car pulled into the driveway. I watched them approach the front door, saw Claire notice the eviction notice, saw her rip it off the door. She tried her key. It didn't work. Confusion crossed her face. She tried again, jiggling the key, forcing it. Nothing. Brandon tried his key, the one he had made without my permission months ago. Also useless. I watched Claire's face shift from confusion to understanding to rage in the span of seconds. She started pounding on the door. "Mom. Open this door right now." More pounding. "I know you're in there." Brandon pulled out his phone, calling me. I didn't answer. Claire tried the back door, the side door, all locked with new keys she didn't have. She peered in the windows and must have seen the boxes in the garage because she started screaming. "You can't do this. This is my home. I grew up here." Neighbors were starting to notice. I saw Mrs. Patterson from across the street come out onto her porch, watching. Mr. Chen slowed his lawn mowing to observe. This was exactly what I had hoped to avoid, a public scene, but it was also unavoidable. Claire and Brandon needed to understand that their actions had consequences, and sometimes those consequences were public and humiliating. Brandon pulled Claire toward the car, probably trying to get her to calm down, to think strategically. But Claire was beyond reason. She ran back to the door and started kicking it, screaming words I couldn't quite make out through the camera's audio but that were clearly obscene. Brandon grabbed her arm and physically pulled her to the car. They sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, and I could see them arguing, Claire crying, Brandon gesturing angrily. Then my phone rang. Brandon's number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Yes?" My voice was cold, formal. "Mrs. Margaret, what the hell is going on?" Brandon's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "I think the eviction notice is quite clear. You have 30 days to find alternative housing." There was a pause, then his voice dropped to something uglier. "You're making a big mistake. Claire is your daughter. Family doesn't treat family like this. You're going to regret this." The threat was unmistakable. "Brandon, I suggest you review the documents I left on the kitchen counter. All evidence of your fraud and Claire's has been turned over to the police and my attorney. If you threaten me again, a restraining order will be the least of your concerns. Any further communication needs to go through my lawyer." I gave him James's number and hung up. My heart was racing, but I felt strong. I had stood up to them, set my boundary, and I hadn't backed down. Over the next hour, they tried everything. Claire called from Brandon's phone since I had blocked her number. I didn't answer. They tried video calling. Nothing. Claire sent emails, long rambling messages that cycled through every manipulation tactic she knew. First anger, "How dare you do this to your own daughter?" Then guilt, "After everything I've been through, this is how you treat me?" Then bargaining, "If you just let us back in, we can talk about this like adults." Then threats, "You're going to be sorry. Everyone will know what a terrible mother you are." I read them all, saved them all for my attorney, and responded to none of them. By evening, they had given up and driven away. Through my network of neighborhood contacts, I learned they had checked into a cheap motel on the highway. The next morning, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Is this Margaret?" A woman's voice, professional but concerned. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Detective Sarah Ramirez from the police department." I'm calling about the identity theft and fraud report you filed. I've reviewed the evidence you submitted, and I'd like to schedule a time to take your full statement. The reality of what I had set in motion hit me then. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was a criminal investigation. Yes, of course. When would you like to meet? The interview with Detective Ramirez was thorough and emotionally draining. She was kind but direct, asking detailed questions about the timeline, the finances, the discovery of the fraud. She looked at every piece of evidence I had gathered, nodding occasionally, making notes. Mrs. Margaret, I want you to understand something. What's been done to you is serious. The credit cards opened in your name alone constitute felony identity theft. The forged documents show intent to commit real estate fraud. Combined with the amount of money involved and the text messages showing premeditation, we're looking at multiple felony charges. She paused, studying my face. The district attorney will ultimately decide whether to prosecute, but with this evidence, I believe they will. Are you prepared for that? For your daughter potentially facing serious criminal charges? The question hung in the air. Was I prepared? Claire was 26 years old, an adult who had made deliberate choices to victimize me. But she was also my daughter, the baby I had held, the child I had raised. Detective, I need to know that this stops. That she can't do this to me or anyone else again. Whatever that takes. Detective Ramirez nodded slowly. I understand. We'll proceed with the investigation. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you maintain no contact with Claire or Brandon. Document everything. Save every message, every call, every attempt at contact. If they show up at your home or workplace, call 911 immediately. She handed me her card. You're not alone in this, Mrs. Margaret. What you're doing takes incredible courage. The next few days were a blur of legal proceedings and emotional turmoil. My attorney James filed a civil lawsuit against Claire for the return of the money she had stolen, plus damages. The amount was staggering when laid out in legal documents: $47,000 in credit card charges, $60,000 in student loans she had promised to help repay, $15,000 in fraudulent loans taken out in my name, plus the cost of damaged credit, legal fees, and emotional distress. The total approached $200,000. James was realistic with me. We won't get all of this. Claire doesn't have assets. But a judgment means we can garnish her wages if she ever gets a job, claim any inheritance she might receive, put a lien on any property she acquires. It's about establishing legal accountability. Claire and Brandon hired an attorney, though I couldn't imagine where they got the money. Their lawyer sent a response that was equal parts defensive and offensive. They claimed I had given Claire permission to use the credit cards, that the charges were gifts, that I was mentally unstable and fabricating evidence because I was angry about her relationship with Brandon. They painted a picture of a controlling, vindictive mother who couldn't accept her adult daughter's independence. Reading their version of events was like reading about strangers. Was this really how Claire saw our relationship? As me controlling her rather than me sacrificing for her? The social media warfare began shortly after. Claire posted a long, emotional message on Facebook and Instagram about how her abusive mother had kicked her out with nowhere to go, how she was homeless because of my cruelty, how she was devastated by this betrayal. The post included a photo of her crying, sitting on what looked like a motel bed, looking vulnerable and heartbroken. Within hours, it had hundreds of sympathetic comments. Stay strong. Your mother sounds toxic. You deserve better. Some of these comments were from people I knew, people from our church, old family friends. It stung to see how easily they believed her narrative without knowing the full story. I wanted to respond, to defend myself, to share my side. But James was adamant. Do not engage on social media. Do not respond to anything. Silence is power here. Let the legal system do the talking. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, watching people I had known for years turn against me based on Claire's lies, and staying silent. Rita, bless her, was my rock during this time. The truth will come out, she kept telling me. It always does. People who matter will see through her lies. I wanted to believe her, but the isolation was crushing. Then the tide began to turn. James, with my permission, released a carefully worded statement to a local news outlet that had picked up on Claire's social media story. The statement was brief but devastating. Ms. Claire has been named in a criminal investigation regarding identity theft and fraud against her mother, who is the actual victim in this situation. Multiple felony charges are pending. All evidence has been turned over to law enforcement. Ms. Claire's social media claims are demonstrably false and defamatory. Attached to the statement were selected pieces of evidence, redacted bank statements showing the fraudulent accounts, copies of the forged documents, screenshots of the text messages where Claire and Brandon mocked me and planned their manipulation. The effect was immediate. Claire's sympathetic post was suddenly flooded with different comments. Did you really commit fraud against your own mother? Those text messages are disgusting. You should be ashamed. People who had initially supported her now turned on her with equal fervor. Claire deleted the original post within hours, but screenshots had spread everywhere. Someone had shared it to a local community Facebook group with over 10,000 members, and the discussion thread had grown to hundreds of comments, most of them condemning Claire's actions. People I hadn't heard from in years reached out to me with messages of support. I always knew something was off with Claire. You were too good to her, Margaret. She took advantage. The vindication felt good but also hollow. I didn't want to be right about my daughter being a manipulative fraud. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to wake up and discover this was all a misunderstanding. 3 weeks into the 30-day eviction period, Brandon disappeared. According to the motel manager who I later spoke with, he checked out early one morning while Claire was at a court-mandated mediation meeting, taking all his belongings and leaving no forwarding information. Claire returned to find him gone, along with what little money they had scraped together. A mutual acquaintance told me Claire had a complete breakdown in the motel parking lot, screaming and crying for hours. Part of me, the mother part that I couldn't completely silence, wanted to go to her, to comfort her. But I didn't. She had made her choices, aligned herself with someone who was clearly using her, and now she was facing the natural consequences of those decisions. Claire was forced to find work, real work, for the first time in her adult life. With her reputation in tatters, her social media presence destroyed, her influencer dreams evaporated, she ended up taking a job at a retail store in the mall. Minimum wage, part-time hours, standing on her feet all day helping customers. She moved into a small studio apartment in one of the cheaper parts of town, sharing a bathroom with 3 other units on her floor. Through my network of acquaintances, information filtered back to me about her new life. She struggled constantly, barely making rent, eating ramen noodles, taking the bus because she couldn't afford car insurance. The contrast with her previous life of luxury funded by my credit cards must have been devastating. The criminal case moved forward. The district attorney decided to prosecute, charging Claire with 3 counts of identity theft, 2 counts of fraud, and 1 count of attempted real estate fraud. Brandon was also charged but couldn't be located for arrest. A warrant was issued, but he had seemingly vanished. Claire's public defender tried to negotiate a plea deal. In exchange for pleading guilty to reduced charges, she would receive probation, community service, mandatory financial counseling, and in order to repay a portion of the money through a structured payment plan. The alternative was going to trial, where the evidence against her was overwhelming and she would likely receive jail time. I had to make a decision about what I wanted. The prosecutor asked me directly, "Mrs. Margaret, what outcome would satisfy you?" I thought about it for days. Did I want my daughter in jail? The mother in me recoiled from that idea. But did I want her to face no real consequences, to learn no real lesson? Finally, I told the prosecutor, I want accountability. I want restitution to the extent possible. I want her to understand the gravity of what she did. But I don't want her life destroyed beyond repair. Probation and restitution seem appropriate. The plea deal was accepted. Claire would be on probation for 5 years, would pay me $500 a month for 10 years, would complete 200 hours of community service, and would attend mandatory counseling. Her felony conviction would remain on her record. The day of the sentencing, I went to the courthouse. I hadn't seen Claire in person in almost 4 months. When she walked in with her public defender, I barely recognized her. She had lost weight, her clothes were cheap and ill-fitting, her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup, no designer accessories. She looked small and defeated and very young. When her eyes met mine, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, genuine remorse, fear, and shame. The judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I had prepared something, practiced it, but when I stood up to speak, different words came out. Your Honor, Claire is my only child. I raised her alone, sacrificed everything to give her opportunities one never had. I thought I was teaching her that hard work and dedication lead to success. Instead, somehow, she learned entitlement and manipulation. I don't know where I went wrong as a parent, but I accept my share of responsibility for enabling her behavior for too long. I looked at Claire directly then. What you did to me, Claire, broke my heart. Not just the money, though that was devastating. The betrayal. The lies. The complete lack of respect for everything I sacrificed for you. You treated me like a resource to be exploited rather than a person who loved you. But I hope this experience teaches you something I clearly failed to teach you. Actions have consequences, integrity matters, and real love requires respect. Claire was crying silently, her shoulders shaking. The judge sentenced her according to the plea agreement, adding, Ms. Claire, you are fortunate to have a mother with such grace. Many victims in her position would have insisted on maximum prosecution. I hope you use this second chance to become the person your mother believed you could be. After the sentencing, Claire approached me in the hallway outside the courtroom, her attorney hovering nervously nearby. Mom, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything, but I'm so sorry. I looked at her, this woman who was my daughter but felt like a stranger, and I felt a complicated mix of emotions, love, anger, grief, and hope. I hope you are sorry, Claire. I hope you learn from this. But sorry isn't enough. Change behavior is what matters now. 6 months passed. I rebuilt my life piece by piece. The credit card companies, seeing the police reports and court judgments, forgave most of the fraudulent debt. My credit score slowly climbed back up. I paid off the legitimate debt through a debt consolidation loan and by working extra shifts. I redecorated the house, reclaiming every space that Claire and Brandon had occupied. The master bedroom became mine again, painted a soft blue I had always loved. I joined a book club at the library and made new friends who knew nothing about my family drama. I started dating a kind man named Robert, a retired teacher I met at a hospital charity event. I began seeing a therapist regularly, working through the guilt and grief of what had happened with my daughter. Claire and I had no contact during this time, per the terms of her probation. She paid her monthly restitution faithfully, $500 appearing in my account on the first of each month like clockwork. Through the grapevine, I heard she was still working retail, had been promoted to shift supervisor, had stayed in therapy voluntarily even after the court-mandated sessions ended. She had apparently severed all contact with Brandon, who remained a fugitive on the outstanding warrant. These updates came third-hand, filtered through mutual acquaintances, but I found myself caring about them, hoping despite everything that she was genuinely changing. 1 year after the sentencing, a letter arrived. Not through an attorney this time, but through regular mail, Claire's handwriting on the envelope. I held it for 3 days before opening it, afraid of what it might contain. When I finally worked up the courage, I found 6 pages of dense, handwritten text. The letter was unlike anything Claire had ever written to me. It was raw, honest, and painful to read. She described her journey through therapy, her growing understanding of how she had been manipulated by Brandon but also how she had been complicit, choosing to believe his lies because they were easier than facing responsibility. She wrote about growing up watching me work myself to exhaustion and developing a twisted sense of entitlement, believing she deserved comfort because I had had to struggle. She wrote about how retail work had humbled her, how struggling to pay rent had taught her the value of money in a way her expensive education never had. The most powerful paragraph came near the end. Mom, I know you said sorry isn't enough, that changed behavior matters. I'm trying every day to become someone worthy of your forgiveness, even though I know I may never achieve it. I look at the choices I made, the person I was, and I'm horrified. I treated you with such cruelty, such disrespect. I exploited your love in the most calculating way. The worst part is that Brandon didn't make me do any of it. He encouraged me, yes, but every choice was mine. Every lie, every forged signature, every mocking text message, that was me. I own that now. I'm learning to live with that shame and use it as motivation to be better. She continued, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect us to have a relationship ever again. But I needed you to know that I finally understand what you were trying to teach me all along. Real family means respect, sacrifice, and love that uplifts rather than exploits. You showed me that kind of love for 26 years, and I threw it away. If I could go back and change everything, I would. Since I can't, all I can do is try to become the daughter you deserve to have. Thank you for giving me the chance to learn this lesson, even though I had to learn it the hardest way possible. I love you, and I'm sorry. Your daughter, Claire. I read the letter 3 times, crying through all 3 readings. It felt genuine in a way Claire's communications never had before. There was no manipulation, no request for anything, no attempt to minimize her actions. Just pure accountability and remorse. I kept the letter, placed it in a drawer where I kept important documents, and thought about what to do. My therapist encouraged me to sit with my feelings, not to rush into any decisions about reconciliation. Forgiveness is a process, she reminded me. And rebuilding trust takes time, if it's even possible. You don't owe anyone forgiveness on their timeline. After 2 weeks, I wrote back. My letter was shorter, more guarded. Claire, I received your letter. I appreciate your honesty and your accountability. I believe you are genuinely working on yourself, and I'm glad. However, I'm not ready for more than this limited contact. The wounds are still too fresh, the trust too shattered. Perhaps in time, we can explore a different kind of relationship, but it would need to be built from the ground up with clear boundaries. I wish you well in your continued growth. Margaret. I signed it with my first name rather than a mom, a small but significant distinction. I wasn't ready to be her mother again. I wasn't sure I ever would be. 3 months later, another letter arrived. This one was even briefer. Mom, thank you for responding. I understand your need for distance, and I respect it. I'm not writing to ask for anything or to push for reconciliation. I just wanted you to know that I completed my community service hours. I volunteered at a women's shelter, helping women who were fleeing domestic violence get back on their feet. Hearing their stories of abuse and exploitation, I saw myself in the abusers, not the victims. It was devastating but necessary. I'm learning what it means to help others without expecting anything in return. I hope you're doing well. I think about you every day. Claire. This pattern continued for another year. Claire would write every few months, brief updates on her life, her continued therapy, her job, her growing understanding of herself and her past actions. I would respond occasionally, never more than a few sentences, maintaining strict boundaries but acknowledging her efforts. Through these letters, I watched my daughter slowly become a person I didn't recognize, but in a good way this time. She wrote about learning to budget, about the satisfaction of earning her own way, about friendships she was building based on honesty rather than manipulation. She wrote about the shame she felt running into people who knew about the fraud case, and how she was learning to face that shame head-on rather than running from it or blaming others. 2 years after the sentencing, Claire asked in a letter if we could meet for coffee. Just once, she wrote. In a public place, wherever you feel comfortable. I don't expect anything beyond that one meeting. I just want to see you, to tell you in person how sorry I am and how grateful I am that you gave me the chance to change. If you say no, I understand completely. I discussed it with my therapist, with Rita, with Robert, who had become a steady presence in my life. Everyone agreed it was my choice, that I should only do it if and when I felt ready. After a week of deliberation, I agreed. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory, on a Saturday afternoon. I arrived early, my heart pounding, palms sweating. I almost left 3 times before Claire arrived. When she walked in, I was struck again by how different she looked. She was healthy now, her weight back to normal, dressed simply but neatly in jeans and a plain sweater. No designer labels, no ostentatious jewelry, just Claire. She saw me and her face lit up with an expression of such hope and fear that it broke my heart a little. She approached the table cautiously, as if I might bolt. "Hi, Mom. Thank you for meeting me." The word "Mom" on her lips made me want to cry. We sat in awkward silence for a moment. I broke it first. "How are you, Claire?" She laughed, a nervous sound. "I'm okay. Better than I have any right to be, honestly. Working full-time now at the store, just got promoted to assistant manager. Still living in my studio, still taking the bus, but I'm making it work. I'm proud of that, actually. Making it work on my own." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I know I hurt you beyond measure. I know I destroyed your trust, your finances, your peace of mind. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. But I wanted to look you in the eye and tell you I'm sorry. Not sorry I got caught, not sorry things didn't work out how I planned, but genuinely sorry for who I was and what I did to you." I looked at her, this woman who was my daughter, and I saw sincerity in her eyes. "Claire, I appreciate that. I do. This has been the hardest 2 years of my life, rebuilding everything you destroyed. But I also had to face some hard truths about myself, about how I enabled your behavior, how I prioritized being liked over being respected, how I sacrificed so much that I taught you my needs didn't matter." Claire shook her head. "No, Mom, that's not on you. You were being a loving parent. I was the one who twisted that love into something ugly. You taught me values and responsibility. I chose to ignore those lessons." We talked for an hour, the first honest conversation we'd had in years, maybe ever. Claire told me about her therapy insights, about how she now understood that Brandon had been abusive and manipulative, but that she had been those things too, just in different ways. She told me about her job, about a coworker who had become a genuine friend, about small joys she was discovering in simple living. She asked about my life, and I found myself telling her about Robert, about the book club, about how I had finally taken a vacation for myself, a week in the mountains that I had paid for in cash, guilt-free. As we stood to leave, Claire hesitated. "Mom, I don't expect us to go back to how things were. I don't think we can, and honestly, I don't think we should. But maybe, someday, we could build something new? Something healthier, with boundaries and honesty?" I considered her question. "Maybe, Claire. Maybe. But it would take time, a lot of time. And it would require consistent change behavior, not just words." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I understand. Thank you for giving me even this much. Thank you for not giving up on me completely, even though you had every right to." We hugged briefly, awkwardly, and I left feeling something I hadn't felt in years, hope. Not hope that everything would be magically fixed, but hope that healing was possible. Now, 3 years after that terrible confrontation in my kitchen, Claire and I meet once a month for coffee. Our relationship is cordial, sometimes even warm, but it's fundamentally different from before. There are boundaries now, firm ones. Claire is not on any of my accounts. She is not in my will. She does not have a key to my house. She knows my financial situation is none of her business. We don't have deep emotional conversations about mother-daughter bonding. Instead, we have honest conversations between 2 adults who are slowly, carefully building trust. Claire paid off her restitution early, working 2 jobs for a year to make larger payments. She wrote me a check for the final amount with a card that said simply, "This doesn't make us even. Nothing can. But it's a start." She's been in a relationship for the past year with a man named Michael who seems genuinely kind, who works as a teacher and shares her apartment dwelling, bus riding lifestyle. She brought him to meet me after 6 months of dating, and I appreciated that he came with no agenda, no charm offensive, just a quiet decency. He knows about her past, about the fraud and the felony conviction, and he told me, everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst moment. Claire is working hard to be that better person. As for me, I'm thriving in ways I never expected. My house is fully mine, a sanctuary of peace. My credit is rebuilt. My retirement savings are recovering. Robert and I are talking about traveling together next year, maybe a cruise to Alaska. I've gone back to school part-time for a certification that will allow me to work as a nurse educator, passing on my knowledge to the next generation. I've discovered hobbies I abandoned years ago, painting and gardening and playing piano. I've learned to prioritize my own needs without guilt, to set boundaries without apology, to love myself as much as I love others. The lesson in all of this, if there is one, is complex. I learned that love without boundaries is not love at all but enabling. I learned that sacrifice is only meaningful when it's respected, not exploited. I learned that being a good parent sometimes means letting your children face the full consequences of their actions, even when it breaks your heart. I learned that you can love someone deeply and still protect yourself from them. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or returning to how things were. It means releasing the anger so it doesn't poison you, while maintaining the wisdom to not repeat past mistakes. To everyone watching this who has dealt with entitled family members, who has been exploited by people you love, who has struggled to set boundaries because you feel guilty, I want you to hear this: you are not responsible for other people's choices. You are not obligated to sacrifice yourself endlessly. You deserve respect, gratitude, and reciprocity in your relationships. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. It's self-preservation and, paradoxically, it's the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for the person who has been taking advantage. Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom before they can rebuild themselves into who they're meant to be. If you're in a situation similar to what I went through, please know you're not alone. Thousands of parents are exploited financially and emotionally by adult children. There are support groups, legal resources, therapists who specialize in family estrangement. You don't have to suffer in silence, and you don't have to accept mistreatment because someone shares your DNA. Family is defined not by blood but by behavior. Real family, genuine family, is built on mutual respect, honest communication, and love that uplifts rather than diminishes. As I sit here now, looking at the life I've rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal, I can honestly say I'm happy. Not in spite of what happened, but in some strange way, because of it. I was forced to find my strength, to value myself, to stop defining my worth by how much I could sacrifice. The woman who stood in that kitchen 3 years ago, hearing her daughter scream, "You're not real family," was broken. But she was also awakened. And the woman sitting here now, sharing this story with you, is whole in a way she never was before. Claire and I will never have a traditional mother-daughter relationship again. Too much has happened, too much trust has been broken. But we have something else now, something perhaps more valuable. We have honesty. We have boundaries. We have respect. And slowly, carefully, we're building something new on a foundation of accountability rather than entitlement, of earned trust rather than assumed obligation. It's not perfect, but it's real. And real, I've learned, is far more valuable than perfect. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If my story has resonated with you, please share it. Comment below with your own experiences of setting boundaries with difficult family members. Subscribe to this channel because I'll be sharing more stories of people who found their strength in the darkest moments. And remember, taking back your power, your home, your life, it's never too late. You're worth fighting for. Your peace matters. And you are always, always enough, exactly as you are.